Why your tomato plants grow like crazy, but produce no fruit. Your tomato plant looks almost perfect. The stem is thick. The leaves are deep green. New branches seem to appear every few days, and the plant may already be taller than you expected. There is only one problem. No tomatoes. Maybe flowers appear and then fall to the ground. Maybe the plant produces endless leaves, but barely flowers at all. Or perhaps small, yellow blossoms open beautifully, yet weeks pass without a single fruit, beginning to swell behind them. For many gardeners, this is one of the most confusing problems of the summer. A weak plant is easy to understand. But what do you do with a tomato plant that looks too healthy? The answer begins with an important idea. Growing leaves and producing fruit are not the same biological job, and sometimes the conditions that create a spectacular green tomato plant are exactly the conditions that prevent a good harvest. The plant that forgot to make tomatoes. A tomato plant has to divide its energy among several competing demands. It must build roots. It must produce stems and leaves. It must create flowers. And eventually, it must support developing fruit. During the early part of its life, vegetative growth is essential. Leaves capture sunlight, roots explore the growing medium, and stems create the structure that will later support the crop. But at some point, the plant needs to shift more of its resources toward reproduction. That is where gardeners sometimes accidentally interfere. One of the most common causes is nitrogen. Nitrogen is essential for plant growth. It is involved in chlorophyll, proteins, enzymes, and many other processes. A tomato plant without enough nitrogen may become pale and weak. But excessive nitrogen can push the plant toward vigorous vegetative growth. The gardener sees huge leaves and rapid growth and assumes the fertilizer is working perfectly. In one sense, it is. The fertilizer is helping the plant grow. It is simply encouraging the wrong kind of growth for the gardener's goal. Instead of producing more flowers and fruit, the plant keeps building foliage. This is why feeding tomatoes is not about giving them as much fertilizer as possible. It is about balance. If a tomato plant is extremely dark green, growing aggressively, and producing few flowers, it may be worth examining the fertilizer program before adding anything else. More food is not always the answer. Sometimes the plant needs less encouragement to grow leaves. When flowers appear, but tomatoes do not. Now imagine a different plant. It has plenty of flowers. Every morning, small yellow blossoms cover the branches. Surely tomatoes are coming. Then several days later, the flowers dry up and fall. No fruit. This is called blossom drop, and it can happen for several reasons. To understand it, we need to look at what happens inside a tomato flower. Tomatoes are self-pollinating. Each flower contains both male and female reproductive structures, and pollen usually needs to move within the flower for successful fertilization. Wind can help. Bees, especially buzzing bees, can help shake pollen loose. Even movement of the plant can contribute. But pollination is strongly influenced by environmental conditions. And temperature is one of the biggest factors. The temperature trap. Tomatoes love warm weather, but they do not love unlimited heat. When daytime temperatures become very high, especially when nights also remain unusually warm, pollen quality and flower function can suffer. The plant may continue growing. It may still look green and vigorous. It may even continue opening flowers. But successful fruit set declines. Cold conditions can create problems too. Tomatoes have a preferred temperature range for reproduction, and when conditions move too far outside that range, flowers may fail to set fruit. This creates a frustrating scene in hot summer gardens. The plant looks tropical. The sun is strong. Growth is explosive. Yet the flowers keep disappearing. A gardener may respond by adding fertilizer. But fertilizer cannot fix heat-damaged pollen. The real issue is environmental stress. In extremely hot conditions, gardeners can sometimes reduce stress by maintaining consistent soil moisture, protecting roots from excessive heating, and using appropriate shade during the harshest part of the day, when necessary. But some weather problems simply require patience. When temperatures return to a more favorable range, fruit set may improve again. The humidity problem. Temperature is not the only environmental factor affecting tomato. Pollen. Humidity matters too. When humidity is extremely high, pollen may become sticky and fail to move effectively. When conditions are extremely dry, reproductive processes can also become less reliable. This is one reason tomatoes can flower beautifully while still producing disappointing fruit. The flower exists, the pollen exists, but the final steps required for fertilization are not happening efficiently. For tomatoes grown on balconies, rooftops, or protected spaces with little air movement, gentle assistance can sometimes help. A gardener can lightly shake the flower clusters or tap the supporting stake during the morning. The goal is not to damage the flowers. It is simply to help pollen move. Some gardeners use an electric toothbrush or similar vibrating tool near the flower cluster to imitate the vibration created by pollinating insects. Usually, only a few seconds are needed. But before blaming pollination alone, there is another invisible resource to examine: light. A tomato plant can be green and still need more sun. Tomatoes are sun-loving plants. A plant growing in partial shade may still produce impressive foliage. Leaves are excellent at adjusting themselves to capture available light, so the plant can appear healthy. But producing a heavy crop of fruit requires a large amount of energy. That energy ultimately comes from photosynthesis. If the plant receives insufficient direct sunlight, flowering and fruit production may suffer even when leaf growth looks acceptable. For container gardeners, this is especially important. A balcony may look bright without actually receiving many hours of direct sun. Nearby buildings can block morning or afternoon light. A rooftop wall can create shade for part of the day. A location that worked in spring may receive a different pattern of light later in the season. So do not judge sunlight by how bright the garden feels. Observe how many hours of direct sun actually reach the plant. For productive tomatoes, more direct sunlight is generally better, provided extreme heat is managed. The watering contradiction. Water can create another confusing problem. Tomato plants need consistent moisture, but both severe drought stress and chronically saturated roots can interfere with healthy growth and fruiting. When a container dries dramatically, the plant enters survival mode. Leaves may wilt, flowers may drop, developing fruit may suffer. Then the gardener sees the wilted plant and floods the pot. The cycle repeats. Dry, soaked, dry, soaked. This instability creates stress. Tomatoes usually perform better when moisture is kept more consistent. That does not mean keeping the soil permanently wet. Roots still need oxygen. The goal is a growing medium that drains well but retains enough moisture that the plant is not repeatedly pushed into severe drought. This connects directly to one of the most important lessons in container gardening. The soil, the container, and the watering routine cannot be treated separately. They form one system. A small pot dries quickly. A dense potting mix stays wet longer. A large plant consumes water faster than a small plant. Hot wind can transform yesterday's perfect watering schedule into today's drought. Good gardeners do not simply water tomatoes. They learn how their particular tomato plant uses water. The container may be too small. A tomato seedling can look tiny when it first enters a container. Then summer arrives. The plant explodes in size. Suddenly, the container that looked enormous 6 weeks ago seems almost ridiculous. Roots begin filling the available space. Water disappears faster. Nutrients become harder to manage. The root zone heats quickly. The plant becomes more vulnerable to fluctuations. A root-bound tomato may continue producing foliage for some time, but maintaining consistent growth and fruit production becomes increasingly difficult. This is why container size matters so much for tomatoes. The exact size depends on the variety and growing system, but vigorous, indeterminate tomatoes generally need substantially more root volume than compact patio varieties. Choosing a container based only on the size of the seedling is a common mistake. You are not choosing a home for the plant you have today. You are choosing a home for the plant it will become. Pruning, helpful or harmful? Tomato pruning creates endless debate among gardeners. Some remove every sucker. Others allow plants to grow almost naturally. The truth depends partly on the tomato variety, climate, support system, and growing goals. Indeterminate tomatoes continue growing and producing over a long season. Selective pruning can help control size, improve airflow, and make a vigorous plant easier to manage. Determinate tomatoes behave differently. They grow to a more defined size and produce much of their crop within a shorter period. Aggressive pruning of determinate varieties can remove productive growth and reduce potential yield. But even with indeterminate tomatoes, more pruning is not automatically better. Leaves are the plant's energy factories. Remove too many and the plant loses photosynthetic capacity. Fruit may also become more exposed to intense sunlight. The goal is not to create a naked tomato plant. The goal is to create a healthy structure with enough foliage to power fruit production and enough airflow to reduce disease pressure. Again, balance. Gardening keeps returning to that word. The fertilizer label tells a story. When a tomato refuses to fruit, look at the fertilizer label. Most fertilizers display 3 numbers representing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. These nutrients perform many overlapping roles in plant biology, and it is too simplistic to say that one nutrient grows leaves while another magically creates flowers. But the overall nutrient balance matters. If a tomato is already producing excessive vegetative growth repeatedly, applying a fertilizer dominated by nitrogen may make the situation worse. The solution is not necessarily to search for the strongest bloom booster available. Instead, stop and evaluate the entire system. Is the plant already overfed? Is there enough sunlight? Are temperatures suitable for fruit set? Are flowers being pollinated? Is moisture consistent? Are roots healthy? Fertilizer is only one piece of the puzzle. A plant cannot be forced into fruit production with a bottle if the environmental conditions are wrong. Read the flowers. One of the most useful habits a tomato gardener can develop is simply observing flowers. Do not wait until harvest time to judge the plant. Look at what the flowers are doing. Are very few flowers appearing? Think about excessive vegetative growth, light, plant maturity, and nutrition. Are many flowers opening but falling without setting fruit? Think about temperature, humidity, pollination, water stress, and other environmental conditions. Is a tiny green tomato beginning to swell behind the flower? That is evidence that pollination and fertilization succeeded. The flower is a diagnostic tool. It tells you where the plant is in the reproductive process. Once you learn to read flowers, the mystery becomes easier to solve. The 7-point tomato check. So if your tomato plant is huge, green, and almost fruitless, walk through the problem in order. First, look at nitrogen. Is the plant excessively lush and dark green? Have you been applying high nitrogen fertilizer frequently? Second, look at sunlight. How many hours of direct sun does the plant actually receive? Third, look at temperature. Have days or nights been unusually hot or cold? Fourth, look at the flowers. Are they forming? Are they dropping? Are tiny fruits beginning to develop? Fifth, think about pollination. Is the plant outdoors with wind and insects, or in a protected location, where flowers may benefit from gentle vibration? Sixth, examine moisture. Is the plant repeatedly going from extremely dry to soaking wet? And seventh, look below the surface. Is the container large enough? Is the potting mix draining well? Are the roots healthy? Do not change everything at once. That makes it impossible to know what worked. Observe. Choose the most likely cause. Make a reasonable adjustment. Then give the plant time to respond. From green giant to harvest. There is something almost comical about a giant tomato plant with no tomatoes. It can climb over a trellis, cover a balcony railing, and produce enough leaves to look like a small tree. Yet the gardener is still waiting for dinner. But the plant is not broken. It is responding to its environment. Nitrogen tells it that resources are available for growth. Heat can tell its flowers that conditions are poor for reproduction. Shade limits the energy available for fruit. Water stress shifts the plant toward survival. Poor pollination interrupts the journey from flower to tomato. Every response makes sense when viewed from the plant's perspective. And that is one of the most valuable changes a gardener can make. Stop asking, "Why won't my tomato obey me?" Start asking, "What is the plant responding to?" The first tomato. One morning, after days of watching yellow flowers open and disappear, the gardener notices something different. A flower has faded, but it has not fallen. Behind it is a tiny green sphere, no larger than a pea. It is easy to overlook, but that tiny fruit means the system worked. The plant had enough energy. The flower developed. Pollen moved. Fertilization occurred. The roots supplied water and nutrients. The environment stayed favorable long enough for reproduction to continue. Over the next several days, the tiny tomato expands. Then another appears, and another. The plant that seemed determined to produce nothing but leaves begins, turning sunlight into fruit. There was no miracle fertilizer, no secret trick. The gardener simply learned to remove the obstacles standing between vigorous growth and successful reproduction. That is the deeper lesson behind a tomato plant that grows like crazy, but refuses to fruit. A healthy-looking plant is not always a balanced plant, and a successful garden is not created by forcing nature to work harder. It is created by understanding what nature is already trying to do. So when your tomato becomes a giant wall of green with no harvest in sight, do not panic. Read the leaves. Read the flowers. Check the soil. Watch the weather. And listen to what the plant is telling you. Because somewhere inside all that green growth, the next tomato may already be waiting to begin.